My daughter said you're dead to us, so I made it official, and this is my real-life story as lesson to others. I am 57 years old, and the day my daughter looked me in the eyes and told me I was dead to her, something inside me went quiet in a way I still struggle to explain. It was not the kind of quiet that comes after yelling or crying. It was heavier than that. It felt like the moment right after a storm when the wind stops, but you know the damage is already done. We were standing in my living room, the same living room where I once spent an entire afternoon teaching her how to ride a bike. I still remember wrapping duct tape around the handlebars because the grips were loose, and I did not have time to run to the store. She was 7 years old, scared, laughing, and trusting me with her whole heart. That memory flashed through my mind in a split second, and then it disappeared when she said the words she had clearly rehearsed. You are dead to us. Not just to me, to us. That word "us" felt like a door slamming shut behind me. It told me this was not a misunderstanding. This was a decision. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask why. I did not even ask who us included, because deep down I already knew. It meant her husband. It meant my grandkids. It meant the future I thought I had earned just by being present, by working myself half to death, by believing that being a good man would be enough. I nodded like an idiot because my brain was still trying to protect me. Part of me honestly believed this was temporary, like when she was a teenager and said she hated me because I would not let her go to a party. I told myself she would cool off, she would call, she would realize how cruel those words were, but time did not soften anything. Time sharpened it. Every day that passed without a call, without a text, without even anger, made it clearer that this was not a moment. This was an ending. What hurt the most was not just what she said, but how calm she was when she said it. There was no shaking in her voice, no tears, no hesitation. She spoke like someone reading a sentence they had accepted as truth a long time ago. The calm scared me more than yelling ever could. It meant she had already mourned me while I was still standing there breathing. It meant I was not losing her in that moment. I had lost her long before, and I was just finding out. I remember looking around the room after she left, noticing small things I had ignored for years. The dent in the wall from when she threw a toy track as a toddler. The picture frame on the shelf that still held her high school graduation photo. I realized how strange it was that a place filled with memories could suddenly feel like a house I was no longer allowed to live in emotionally. That night I sat alone on the couch and replayed my entire life like it was a courtroom trial, and I was both the defendant and the judge. I went over every argument, every missed call, every moment I chose work over dinner, and every time I thought providing was the same thing as being emotionally available. I asked myself if I deserved this sentence. I asked myself if I had failed so badly that being erased was the only solution. But the more I thought about it, the more something else started to surface. I realized I had spent my entire life apologizing for existing in other people's expectations. I had stayed quiet to keep the peace. I had given more than I could afford to give, emotionally and financially, because I believed that love meant sacrifice without limits. And now, after all of that, I had been declared dead by the one person I thought would always see me as her father first. The strangest part was the silence that followed. No follow-up conversation, no attempt to soften the words, just absence. And absence does something to a man. It forces you to sit with yourself without distraction. In that silence, I began to understand something uncomfortable but powerful. When someone tells you that you are dead to them, they are not just rejecting you. They are rewriting your role in their life in a way that benefits them. They get closure without responsibility. They get freedom without accountability. And you are expected to disappear quietly so they do not have to feel the weight of what they have done. For weeks I lived like a ghost on purpose. I did not call mutual friends. I did not ask for updates. I did not post online. I let the world move on without me because I needed to understand who I was when no one was watching. And that is when it hit me. I was still alive. My heart still worked. My mind still worked. My hands still built things. My value did not vanish just because someone decided to label me as gone. That realization did not come with fireworks or confidence. It came slowly, like learning how to walk again after an injury. I started asking myself a question that changed everything. If I am dead to them, then why am I still living like I owe them my future? The question led me down a path I never thought I would take, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. I stopped imagining reconciliation as something I had to earn by suffering long enough. I stopped believing that being a father meant accepting any level of emotional harm without boundaries. I began to understand that love does not give anyone the right to erase you and still benefit from what you built. That was the moment I decided that if my daughter wanted me to be dead to her, then I would honor that reality fully, completely, and officially. I did not want revenge in the loud, dramatic way people talk about it. I did not want arguments or public scenes. I wanted clarity. I wanted alignment between words and reality. I wanted my life to finally reflect the truth of how I was being treated, because the worst kind of pain is living a lie for the comfort of people who have already decided you do not matter. What I did next was not meant to hurt her. It was meant to save me. And once I made that decision, there was no going back. Because sometimes survival looks like walking away from the people who taught you what love was supposed to feel like, and choosing yourself for the first time in your life. Before I became the man my daughter decided to walk away from, I was just a regular American dad who truly believed in the simple rules I was raised with. Work hard, keep your word, take care of your family. Do those things long enough, and life would eventually meet you halfway. I did not grow up with big dreams or fancy plans. I grew up blue-collar in Ohio, in a town where people judged you by how you showed up, not by what you said online or how you dressed. Men shook hands like it meant something, and if you promised to be somewhere, you showed up even if you were tired, broke, or hurting. That mindset shaped me early, and I carried it into every part of my life without ever questioning whether it was enough. I married young because that is what people did back then. I was barely out of my 20s when I put a ring on her finger, convinced that love was something you built brick by brick, not something you chased. We did not have much money, but we had energy, and we had hope. I worked long days and even longer nights, sometimes coming home so exhausted that I fell asleep on the couch with my boots still on. When my daughter Emily was born, I remember holding her in the hospital room, thinking that this tiny person was now my responsibility forever. I promised myself right then that I would give her a better life than the one I had, no matter what it cost me. That promise became the center of my life. I started a small construction business with nothing but an old pickup truck that barely ran and a set of borrowed tools from a friend who believed in me more than I believed in myself. I took every job I could get, roofs in the summer heat, basements in the winter cold, repairs that paid next to nothing but helped my name spread around town. I missed things along the way. I missed birthdays when jobs ran late. I missed school plays because I was stuck on a site 2 hours away and could not leave. Those memories still hurt, because even now, I wish I had known that time was the one thing I could never earn back. But at the time, I truly believed that every missed moment was a deposit into her future. I showed my love the only way I knew how. I paid for braces when her teeth started shifting. I paid for college tuition even when it meant refinancing the house. I bought cars I could barely afford so she would not feel left out among her friends. I paid for a wedding that nearly put me under financially, standing there smiling while my bank account quietly bled because I wanted her to have the day she dreamed of. I did not complain. I did not ask for praise. In my mind, this was my job. This was what a father did. Love was sacrifice, and sacrifice was silent. Emily was my pride in every sense of the word. She was smart, sharp, confident, and fearless in ways I never was. I used to joke that she got my stubborn streak and her mother's fire, and that combination made her unstoppable. I bragged about her to anyone who would listen. I kept her report cards in a drawer like trophies. When she succeeded, I felt like I had done something right in this world. Watching her grow into an adult gave my life meaning, especially during the years when my marriage slowly started to fall apart in ways neither of us knew how to fix. After 32 years of marriage, her mother and I divorced, not because of cheating, not because of some dramatic betrayal. We just became strangers who shared a history but no longer shared a future. We handled it like adults, or at least I thought we did. There was no screaming, no courtroom drama, no dragging each other through the mud. We sat at the table one night and admitted we were tired. Tired of pretending, tired of forcing conversations, tired of being lonely together. I believed that honesty was better than living a lie, and I honestly thought our daughter would understand that. What I did not understand was how divorce changes the story people tell themselves. I did not see how quietly blame can shift when pain needs a target. I never imagined that the end of my marriage would slowly turn into the end of my relationship with my daughter. I thought the bond between a father and a daughter was permanent, something stronger than marriages and arguments and misunderstandings. I thought love like that was unbreakable. I was wrong, dead wrong. Looking back now, I see the cracks forming long before everything broke. I see the moments where I assumed being reliable was the same thing as being emotionally present. I see how I let exhaustion replace conversation. I see how I believed providing was enough, because that belief kept me from facing my own shortcomings. But I also see a man who tried, a man who never stopped loving his child, a man who would have walked through fire for his family without hesitation. That man existed. He was real, and losing him, losing the version of myself who believed love was permanent and loyalty was returned, hurt almost as much as losing my daughter herself. Before everything broke, I was not perfect, but I was honest, I was loyal, I was present in the ways I understood, and I never imagined that one day all of that would be rewritten into a story where I was the villain, the absence, the man easy to erase. That realization did not come all at once. It came slowly, painfully, and it changed me in ways I am still learning to accept. It did not happen all at once, and that is the part people never warn you about. Estrangement does not arrive like an explosion where you can point to the exact second everything fell apart. It moves quietly, almost politely, slipping into your life so slowly that by the time you notice something is wrong, you are already standing on the outside looking in. At first, it felt harmless. Phone calls that used to last an hour were suddenly 10 minutes long. The laughter faded first. Then the questions stopped. She no longer asked how my day was or what job I was working on. Conversations became updates instead of connections, like she was checking a box instead of talking to her father. I told myself this was normal. She was busy. She had kids. Life gets loud. That is what I said out loud. Inside, though, something didn't sit right. Visits started getting cancelled for reasons that sounded reasonable on the surface but hollow underneath. Someone had a cold. The kids were tired. The weekend was already full. Holidays came with careful explanations that felt rehearsed. We're doing something small this year. Maybe next time. Every excuse came wrapped in politeness, which somehow made it worse. I would hang up the phone and stare at it, wondering when my place in her life had become optional. I replayed conversations in my head, searching for a moment I might have missed, a sentence that changed everything. But there was never one clear turning point, just distance. Slow, steady distance. Then the words started changing. Emily began using phrases that didn't sound like her, phrases that felt borrowed. You abandoned Mom, you chose yourself, you broke the family. Hearing those words from her mouth felt like watching someone you love read from a script you've never seen before. I tried to respond calmly. I told her that adults can love their children deeply and still fail at marriage. I told her that staying in a broken relationship does not always mean staying loyal. I told her that sometimes leaving is the most honest thing a person can do, but she wasn't listening anymore. She was waiting for me to stop talking so she could repeat the same lines again. That was when I realized something terrifying. Someone else was speaking through her, shaping her view of me one quiet comment at a time. Her mother never came at me directly, she never called to accuse me or yell at me. She didn't have to, she was more careful than that. She used silence like a weapon and sadness like proof. A sigh here, a tired look there. A story told just slightly tilted so the weight landed on me. She never told Emily to hate me. She didn't need to. She let Emily fill in the blanks with anger, and anger is always eager to have a target. I wasn't in the room when those conversations happened. I wasn't there to explain or defend myself. I only saw the results afterward, in the way Emily's eyes hardened when she looked at me, in the way her patience for me disappeared. By the time I understood what was happening, I was already on the outside of something I didn't even know I was losing. When I offered to sit down and talk things through, really talk, Emily said she was tired of excuses. That word excuses cut deep, because I had never seen my love for her as something I needed to justify. I wasn't asking to be forgiven for a crime. I was asking to be understood as a human being. When I sent messages after that, they went unanswered. Not angry replies, not even short ones. Just silence. Silence has a way of making you feel smaller than anger ever could. At least anger means you still exist to someone. Silence feels like erasure. I remember one Sunday in particular, A day that still plays in my head when I can't sleep. I hadn't seen my grandkids in weeks, and the ache had built up into something I couldn't ignore anymore. I drove over without calling, telling myself I just wanted to say hello, to remind them I was still here. I stood on the porch and knocked, soft at first, then a little louder. I could hear movement inside. I knew they were home. But the door never opened. No one said a word. No one looked through the window. I stood there longer than I should have, feeling foolish and exposed, until I finally turned around and walked back to my truck. I sat there with the engine off, hands shaking on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead like if I didn't move, the moment might rewind itself. That was the night something finally broke in me, not in a loud way, not with tears or shouting. It broke quietly, like a bone cracking under pressure you didn't realize was there. I understood then that love does not protect you from being rewritten as the villain. Years of sacrifice can be edited out. Context can be erased. Intent doesn't matter once someone decides on a story that makes their pain easier to live with. I started questioning my own memories after that. I wondered if I had imagined being a good father. I wondered if every late night at work, every missed event, had added up to something unforgivable. I replayed my life like a film on fast forward, searching for proof that I deserved this ending. But the more I looked, the more I realized something else. The story being told about me wasn't built on facts alone. It was built on feelings that needed a villain to make sense. And I was the easiest one to assign that role to, because I wasn't there to defend myself when the whispers started. What hurt most was realizing how little it took to turn whispers into walls. A few repeated phrases, a shared disappointment, a narrative reinforced often enough that it started to feel true. Walls don't rise overnight. They are built brick by brick, conversation by conversation, silence by silence. By the time you notice them, they are already too high to climb without help from the other side. And no one on the other side was reaching back for me anymore. I tried everything I knew how to try without humiliating myself. I wrote letters that I never sent because they sounded like pleas. I practiced conversations in my head that never happened. I asked mutual friends if I had done something unforgivable, hoping someone would point to a specific mistake I could fix. No one ever did. They just shrugged and said things like families are complicated, or give it time. Time. That word started to feel like a lie people told when they didn't know what else to say. Time wasn't healing anything. Time was creating distance. Slowly, painfully, I began to understand that I was no longer being judged as a father. I was being judged as a symbol. I represented the failure of a marriage, the disruption of a childhood memory, the discomfort of accepting that adults make choices that hurt without meaning to. It was easier to turn me into the reason everything fell apart than to accept that sometimes things break without a single person to blame. And once that version of me took hold, the real me didn't stand a chance. By the time I fully accepted that I was no longer welcome in my daughter's emotional world, I had already been pushed out of her physical one. I wasn't invited. I wasn't consulted. I wasn't considered. I existed only as a problem she had already solved by removing me. Sitting alone in my trek that night, I finally understood the truth I had been avoiding. I wasn't losing her because I stopped loving her. I was losing her because loving me no longer fit the story she needed to survive her own pain. And that realization, more than anything else, prepared me for the words she would eventually say out loud, the words that would make official what had already been happening in silence for a very long time. A final conversation happened on a Thursday afternoon, and I remember that detail because the rain would not let me forget it. It was the slow, steady kind that does not make noise so much as it presses down on everything, turning streets darker and thoughts heavier. Emily asked me to meet her at a coffee shop halfway between our neighborhoods. Neutral ground, she said, like we were negotiating a truce, instead of trying to save a relationship that was already bleeding out. That phrase should have warned me, but I still went in with a small, stupid hope tucked away in my chest. Hope has a way of surviving even when it has no business being there. She arrived a few minutes late, shaking the rain off her coat, eyes already distant. She did not hug me. She did not even smile. She slid into the chair across from me and wrapped both hands around her cup like it was something solid she could hold on to. She did not look at me, not once. She stared at the foam on top of her drink, as if answers might rise out of it, if she waited long enough. I asked how she was doing, the way a father does even when he knows the question won't be answered honestly. She nodded, and said fine, a word so empty it echoed. That was when I knew this wasn't a conversation. It was a delivery. He took a breath, steady and practiced, and told me she had made a decision for her mental health. That phrase landed between us like a legal document. Mental health, clean, polite, final. It was spoken the way people speak when they don't want questions, when they want something to sound unchallengeable. I felt my stomach tighten, because I knew what usually followed words like that. She said being around me brought up too much pain for her. She said my presence confused her kids. That part hurt more than I expected, because I had always believed children knew love instinctively, that they could feel it even when adults complicated things. Hearing that I confused them made me feel like something dangerous, something better kept away. I tried to speak, but she kept going, her voice calm, controlled, like she was reading off bullet points she had memorized. She said she needed peace. She said she needed boundaries. She said she was choosing herself now. I nodded along because interrupting felt useless, like trying to stop a train by standing in front of it. And then she said it. You are dead to us, not shouted, not whispered. Said plainly, as if it were a fact she had accepted long before that moment. You are dead to us. The cafe noise faded. The rain outside blurred the windows. I felt something leave my body, something warm and fragile that I had been carrying for years without realizing how heavy it was. I asked her one question, and my voice surprised me by not breaking. I asked if she understood what those words meant. I needed to know if she knew the weight of what she was doing. She finally looked at me then, just for a second, and said yes. She said it was necessary, like removing a limb. Like cutting out something infected. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say she loved me. She said necessary, and that told me everything I needed to know. I stood up before my coffee arrived. I did not want to sit there pretending this was something we could talk through. I did not want to risk saying something I could never take back. Most of all, I did not want to beg, because I knew if I stayed another minute I would. I would remind her of bedtime stories and scraped knees and late-night talks. I would list every sacrifice like it was a receipt proving my worth, and I could not survive seeing that look in her eyes while I did it. So I walked out. I let the rain soak through my jacket. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me upright. That night I sat alone in the dark of my living room, lights off, television silent, replaying my entire life like a confession no one asked to hear. I thought about the times I raised my voice when I was tired, the times I chose work over conversation, the times I assumed love was understood instead of spoken. I wondered if I had failed so completely that this ending made sense. I wondered how something I felt so deeply could be erased so cleanly, like it never mattered at all. The house felt different that night, like it no longer recognized me as its owner. Every memory echoed louder without anyone else there to share it. That was the night the grieving stopped. Up until then, I had been mourning the relationship like something injured, something that might still heal. But after those words, after being declared dead while still breathing, grief turned into something else. Something colder, quieter, more focused. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. A realization that love without respect turns into self-destruction, and that begging someone to see your worth only teaches them that they can take it away. I lay awake until morning, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain slow and finally stop. When the light came through the windows, nothing felt lighter, but something felt settled. The story I had been telling myself about patience and time and understanding finally ended. In its place was a truth I could not ignore anymore. I had been written out of my daughter's life on purpose, and if that was the role she needed me to play, then I would no longer live as a half-present ghost in my own story. That conversation did not just end our relationship. It changed the way I saw myself, and from that moment on, everything I did would be shaped by one simple understanding. If someone declares you dead, you either disappear quietly, or you decide what being alive really means without them. People think revenge is loud. They imagine shouting, accusations, slammed doors, dramatic speeches. That is not how it really works. Real revenge is quiet. It does not announce itself. It sits still, watches, and waits while everyone else assumes you are broken beyond repair. After that Thursday afternoon, after the rain in the coffee shop and the words that officially erased me, I did nothing. And that nothing was the loudest choice I had ever made. No calls, no texts, no letters on birthdays or holidays, no checking in through mutual friends. I disappeared exactly the way they asked, exactly the way they believed I should. I let the silence grow so thick that it became believable. From the outside, it probably looked like acceptance, like defeat, like a man who finally understood his place. But silence is a strange thing. When you stop reacting, you start seeing clearly. For weeks, I lived quietly, moving through my days without the constant background noise of trying to be understood. And in that quiet, I began taking inventory of my life in a way I never had before, not emotionally at first, but practically. I looked at my business, the thing I had built with my own hands over decades. I looked at my will, a document I had signed years earlier, without ever imagining it would one day feel outdated. I looked at my finances, every account, every automatic payment, every promise I had made without realizing that promises, like relationships, require two people to exist. What I realized made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with grief. I was still funding a life that had erased me. College funds sat untouched, waiting for grandchildren who were not allowed to know me. Emergency accounts were quietly growing for a daughter who had declared me dead. A trust I had set up with pride, imagining future hugs and graduations, and thank yous that would now never come. I had built a safety net for people who had cut me loose and walked away without looking back. And the most painful part was not the money, it was the assumption behind it. The assumption that my role was to give endlessly, even when I was no longer considered human enough to be heard. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me cold in a way that sharpened my thinking. I started asking questions I had never allowed myself to ask before. Why did I believe love meant obligation without limits? Why did I think being a father meant accepting emotional execution without protest? Why was I still living, as if reconciliation was inevitable, when every signal told me it was neither wanted nor coming? I understood then that I had been living on pause, waiting for permission to exist again in someone else's life, and waiting had quietly become a form of self-punishment. I spoke to a lawyer shortly after that, not in a rush, not in a rage. I made the appointment calmly, like someone scheduling a checkup after ignoring symptoms for too long. I remember sitting across from him, explaining my situation without emotion, just facts. Estranged daughter, no contact, explicit statement of being cut off. I asked him one simple question, a question that felt almost ridiculous when I said it out loud. What happens when someone declares you dead? He didn't laugh, he didn't look surprised. He leaned back, thought for a moment, and then answered in a way that changed everything. He told me that legally, emotionally, financially, I owed nothing to people who had chosen to sever ties completely. That continuing to fund their lives was not loyalty, it was habit. He told me that wills and trusts are not moral documents. They are practical ones. They reflect reality, not hope. And my reality, whether I liked it or not, was that I no longer had a relationship with my daughter or access to my grandchildren. Keeping them in my future planning was not noble. It was denial. That conversation did not feel like revenge. It felt like someone turning on a light in a room I had been stumbling through for years. I drove home afterward and sat in my car for a long time, hands resting on my knees, thinking about the man I had been taught to be. A man who endures, a man who absorbs pain quietly, a man who believes that suffering is proof of love, and I realized how deeply that belief had trapped me. I had confused endurance with dignity. I had mistaken sacrifice for worth, and in doing so, I had allowed myself to be erased without resistance. That realization hurt, but it also freed me, because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. That was the moment I made the decision nobody expected, not my ex-wife, not my daughter, not the friends who assumed I would eventually soften and reach out again. I decided that if I was dead to them, then I would stop living like a man, begging for permission to exist. I would stop planning my life around people who had removed me from theirs. I would stop bleeding quietly to prove my love. I would accept the reality they had chosen and align my life with it, fully, cleanly, and without apology. I did not rush into action. That would have been emotional. I moved slowly, deliberately, like someone dismantling a house they once loved, brick by brick, making sure the foundation underneath was still solid. I reviewed every account, every document, every future plan. I asked myself a simple question over and over. Does this reflect my reality or my hope? If it was hope, I let it go. Not because hope is bad, but because hope that ignores reality becomes self-harm. I started imagining a future that belonged to me, not one designed around people who had already left. What surprised me most was the sense of calm that followed, not relief, calm. For the first time since the divorce, and maybe even before that, my life felt honest. Painful, yes, but honest. I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't waiting for a call that might never come. I wasn't shaping my decisions around the possibility of forgiveness. I was finally standing in the truth, even though it hurt, especially because it hurt. I understood then that making it official was not about punishing anyone. It was about refusing to live in a half-life, about choosing self-respect over fantasy, about accepting that love offered without boundaries eventually destroys the one offering it. That decision did not make me cruel. It made me awake. And once I was awake, there was no going back to sleep just to make others comfortable. That was the moment my silence stopped being passive and became intentional. The moment my disappearance stopped being grief and became choice. The moment I stopped being the man waiting to be forgiven and became the man deciding what his life would look like without permission from people who had already decided he did not belong.
I did not announce my decision to anyone. I did not warn people. I did not ask for advice or approval. I executed it quietly, the way you do when you finally understand that explanations only invite arguments you no longer have the energy to fight. Once the decision settled inside me, it felt less like a dramatic turning point and more like gravity taking over. Things moved in the direction they were always meant to move, once I stopped resisting the truth. First thing I did was rewrite my will. Sitting at my kitchen table with those papers spread out in front of me felt heavier than I expected. That document had been written years ago, back when the future still looked familiar. Every line reflected a version of my life that no longer existed. Names that once felt permanent now felt like echoes. I didn't rush through it. I read every sentence carefully, making sure I understood what I was undoing and why. This wasn't anger getting my hand. It was clarity. I wasn't taking something away. I was aligning my future with my present reality. A future built around people who had removed me from their lives was not generosity, it was denial. I redirected funds next, accounts that had been quietly growing in the background like promises no one remembered making. College funds, emergency reserves, long-term plans meant to support milestones I would never be invited to witness. I had set those accounts up with pride, imagining myself standing in the back of graduation halls, sitting in the audience at recitals, clapping quietly as life unfolded in front of me. Closing them felt like closing doors I had already been locked out of. Painful, yes, but honest. Each signature felt final, but it also felt lighter, like setting down a weight I had been carrying long after it stopped making sense. Selling the house was harder than I thought it would be. That house had held decades of noise, laughter, arguments, holidays, and ordinary days that only become precious once they are gone. Every Thanksgiving we hosted felt like proof that no matter how messy life got, family would always gather there. Walking through the rooms one last time, I realized how much of that space was built around memories instead of current life. I wasn't living in that house anymore. I was haunting it. Downsizing to a quiet place by the lake felt less like loss and more like stepping into a life that finally fit the man I had become. Mornings they were calm, still, honest, no echoes of arguments, no expectations tied to old traditions, just water, light, and time. Stepping back from the business surprised people. That company had been my identity for so long that many assumed I would work until my body gave out. But I was tired in a way rest couldn't fix. I sold my shares to a partner who had stood by me for years, a man who respected my work, my word, and my silence more than my own blood ever had. Signing those papers didn't feel like giving something up. It felt like handing responsibility to someone who understood its weight. For the first time, my days were no longer dictated by deadlines and demands that left no room for reflection. When everything was done, when my life finally matched the reality I had been forced to accept, I wrote one letter. Just one, not emotional, not angry, not full of explanations. Clear, clean, honest. I told her exactly what she had told me, reflected back without cruelty. You told me I was dead to you. I am honoring that boundary completely. There will be no more contact, no financial support, no inheritance, no emergency safety net. This is not punishment. This is acceptance. I wished them peace, and I meant it. Writing that letter took less time than I expected. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to defend. I mailed it and went about my day. No ceremony, no waiting by the phone. I already knew what would happen next, even if I didn't admit it to myself. When Emily received that letter, she called for the first time in months. I recognized the number immediately. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. The phone rang and I watched it until it stopped. I didn't answer, not out of spite, out of consistency. Boundaries go both ways, and I had finally learned that lesson too late and just in time. That moment wasn't triumphant. It wasn't satisfying in the way movies make it seem. It was quiet, final, and strangely peaceful. For the first time in a long time, my actions matched my words, and my words matched my reality. I wasn't disappearing to punish anyone. I was stepping fully into a life that no longer required me to beg for a place at the table. Making it official wasn't about cutting ties. The ties had already been cut. It was about acknowledging the truth and choosing to live honestly inside it. As the days passed, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't filled with waiting or hope or dread. It was just space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to remember who I was before I learned to measure my worth by how much I was willing to endure. In making it official, I didn't lose myself. I found the version of me that had been buried under years of obligation, expectation, and unreturned loyalty. And for the first time since the words were spoken in that coffee shop, I didn't feel dead at all.
It took months before the reality of my absence truly settled in for them. Silence has a delayed effect like that. At first, it feels like relief to the people who demanded it. There is no conflict, no uncomfortable conversations, no reminders of choices they would rather not examine. Silence feels clean in the beginning, but then life starts happening again, and that is when the quiet becomes loud. I didn't hear about it directly. I heard about it the way you hear about storms from people who watched the sky change before the rain hit. A mutual friend mentioned tuition bills that suddenly felt heavier without a backup plan. Another let it slip that the mortgage felt tighter than expected. Small comments, carefully worded, but all pointing to the same thing. The man who used to quietly fix problems before they became emergencies was gone. I was never thanked for that role when I played it. It was invisible when it existed, but its absence was immediately noticeable. What surprised me was not that they struggled. What surprised me was how shocked Emily apparently was. Through a friend, I heard her say she never thought I would actually disappear. That sentence stuck with me in a strange way. It made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was revealing. You do not get to pronounce someone dead and then complain when they stop breathing for you. That expectation said everything about how she saw me. I was supposed to absorb the words, accept the pain, and still be there in the background, quietly holding everything together just in case. My role was never meant to end. It was meant to be unconditional labor, emotional and financial, without recognition or limits. As the months passed, guilt started creeping back into her life, but guilt is a strange thing. It looks a lot like reflection from the outside, but it isn't the same as accountability. Guilt asks how this makes me feel. Accountability asks, what did I do? From what I heard, Emily felt bad, but she didn't reach out with ownership. There was no acknowledgement of what she had said or how final those words were. There was just discomfort at the consequences. And discomfort alone is not enough to rebuild what was intentionally destroyed. I stayed silent through all of it, not to be cruel, not to make a point. I stayed silent to protect what was left of me. Because once you finally choose yourself after years of being diminished, you realize how fragile that choice can be. One emotional conversation, one guilt-driven apology, one late-night phone call could have pulled me right back into the same cycle. Silence became my shield, not my weapon. Instead of watching their lives from a distance, I turned toward my own. I started traveling, not in a dramatic eat, pray, love way, but simply because I could. I drove through small towns I had only passed through before. I sat in diners where nobody knew my history and nobody expected anything from me. I watched sunsets without feeling like I needed to explain why I was alone. Each mile felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had given away too easily. I volunteered too, something I had always told myself I didn't have time for. Helping strangers turned out to be strangely healing. There were no expectations attached, no emotional debts, just human connection in its simplest form. I met people who knew me as Robert, not as someone's father, not as someone's ex-husband, not as a walking disappointment or a financial plan. Just Robert, a man with stories, skills, and kindness to offer. That alone changed the way I carried myself through the world. Slowly, I built a life that didn't revolve around waiting. I made friends who invited me because they enjoyed my company, not because they needed something fixed or paid for. I laughed more than I had in years, not the forced kind of laughter you use to smooth over tension, but real laughter that surprises you when it comes out. I realized how long it had been since my life actually belonged to me. There were nights when the guilt tried to find me, when old habits whispered that a good father would reach out, that silence was selfish, that love meant enduring anything. But those voices were quieter now. I had learned the difference between love and erasure. I had learned that sacrificing yourself does not make you noble when the sacrifice is demanded, not appreciated. For the first time in decades, my choices were mine. My time was mine. My future was mine. And while silence had started to hurt them, it had started to heal me. That contrast told me everything I needed to know about who had truly benefited from my constant presence and who I had become when I finally stepped away. It was almost exactly a year later when Emily showed up at my door, and I knew the moment I saw her standing there that time had changed her in ways distance alone never could. She looked older, not in years but in weight, the kind of tired that settles behind the eyes and doesn't leave with sleep. Her shoulders were slightly slumped, like she had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was finally setting it down because she couldn't go another step. I stood there quietly, giving her space to speak first, because something told me this moment didn't belong to rushing. She cried almost immediately, not dramatic sobs, not the kind meant to persuade, but the quiet breaking kind, the kind that comes when someone has run out of explanations for themselves. She said my name the way she used to when she was little and scared. She said she had made a mistake. She said she had been angry and confused and overwhelmed. She said family should forgive because that's what family does. As she spoke, memories moved through my mind like shadows. Birthday candles. Late-night talks. The sound of her laughter echoing through rooms that no longer existed in my life. I felt all of it, every pull toward the man I used to be, the man who would have dropped everything just to hold her and say it was okay. I listened, I really did. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I let her say everything she needed to say because I knew how hard it is to come back to a door you once slammed shut. I could hear sincerity in her voice, but I could also hear something else underneath it. Relief. The relief of someone hopping the past could be undone simply by admitting it hurt. And that was when I understood that this conversation, as emotional as it was, still wasn't about me. It was about her needing the pain to stop. When she finally went quiet, when the words ran out and the tears slowed, I spoke. My voice surprised me by how steady it was. I told her the truth, not to wound her, but because anything less would have been another form of lying. I told her that love without respect is not love, it is control. I told her that erasing someone, declaring them dead, is not a boundary, it is an execution. And you cannot erase someone and then expect resurrection on your schedule, when it becomes inconvenient to live with the consequences. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me, and in a way she didn't. I was no longer the man who explained himself endlessly, who softened his truth to keep the peace. I told her I forgave her because I truly had. Carrying that anger would have chained me to the past, and I'd worked too hard to free myself. But forgiveness does not mean restoration. Forgiveness does not rebuild trust automatically. Forgiveness does not reopen doors that were closed with intention. I told her something I had learned the hard way. When you shut a door long enough, the house behind it changes. The rooms rearrange, the air shifts. The person who lived there learns how to live without waiting for footsteps in the hallway. You don't get to walk back in and expect everything to look the same just because you're ready now. She needed to understand that what she had done didn't just hurt me, it reshaped me. She asked if there was any chance. I didn't answer right away, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I respected the weight of the question. Then I told her the truth again. I said I didn't know, and that was the most honest answer I could give. Healing doesn't move on deadlines, and trust doesn't rebuild itself on tears alone. I told her that if there was ever going to be something new between us, it would have to be built slowly, carefully, without entitlement. And it might never look like what it once was. She left that day quieter than she arrived, not angry, not defensive, just thoughtful, and as I closed the door behind her, I waited for the familiar ache to rise up in my chest, the grief, the regret, the urge to chase after her and promise things I wasn't ready to give, but none of that came. Instead, there was peace, real peace. The kind that doesn't ask you to betray yourself for the comfort of others. For the first time, I understood that loving someone does not require you to abandon yourself, that boundaries are not walls meant to punish, but doors meant to protect what matters. Watching her walk away, I felt sadness, yes, but it was clean sadness, not the suffocating kind I had lived with for years. I had spoken my truth. I had honored my pain without becoming bitter, and in doing so, I finally understood what it meant to be alive again. Here is what nobody tells you, not when you are young, not when you are building a family, not even when things begin to fall apart. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction. It is dignity. It is the quiet decision to stop sacrificing yourself for people who keep reopening the same wound and calling it love. At 57, I learned that lesson the hard way, carved into me through loss, silence, and long nights, where I had no one to blame but myself for staying too long in places where I was no longer wanted. For most of my life, I believed strength meant endurance. I believed a good man absorbed pain without complaint. I believed a good father kept showing up no matter how many times the door was shut in his face. That belief shaped every decision I made, and for a long time it felt noble. But nobility becomes self-destruction when it is one-sided. I did not scream when my daughter cut me out. I did not fight to prove my worth. I did not chase her with apologies for things I did not fully understand. I simply stopped bleeding. And that decision, quiet as it was, changed everything. Losing my daughter broke me in a way nothing else ever had. I had faced financial ruin. I had faced physical exhaustion. I had faced the end of a long marriage. None of it came close to the pain of being erased by the person I loved most in the world. There were days when the grief felt physical, like pressure on my chest, like something heavy sitting on my lungs. I questioned my memories. I questioned my identity. I questioned whether the man I thought I was had ever truly existed. That kind of loss doesn't just hurt, it rearranges you. Somewhere in the middle of that pain, something unexpected happened. With no one left to perform for, no one left to impress or appease, I started hearing my own thoughts again. Not the voice that says be better, give more, try harder. The quieter voice that asks, what do you need now? At first, the question made me uncomfortable. I had spent so many years defining myself by what I provided for others that I didn't know how to answer it. But slowly, I learned. I learned that peace is not something you earn through suffering. It is something you protect through boundaries. I learned that love without respect will drain you until there is nothing left, and then blame you for being empty. I learned that forgiveness is for the person who was hurt, not for the comfort of the person who caused the harm. And I learned that walking away does not always mean you stopped loving someone. Sometimes it means you finally started loving yourself. I'm not bitter. People expect bitterness from stories like mine. They expect anger, resentment, harsh words. But bitterness requires energy, and I no longer waste mine on people who chose not to see me. I am not angry either. Anger keeps you tied to the past, replaying the same moments over and over, hoping they will end differently. I have no interest in reliving what has already taught me its lesson. What I feel now is freedom, the kind that comes when you accept reality without fighting it. Freedom is waking up without dread. Freedom is making plans without wondering who might cancel on you. Freedom is being known as yourself, not as someone's disappointment or backup plan. I found freedom in quiet mornings, in honest friendships, in doing good without needing recognition. I found freedom in the simple fact that my life finally belonged to me. If Emily ever truly understands what she lost, that understanding will be heavier than any punishment I could have given. Not because I want her to suffer, but because awareness carries weight. Knowing you pushed away someone who loved you without conditions is a burden no inheritance, no apology, no late reconciliation can fully lift. That realization, if it ever comes, will be hers to carry, not mine to enforce. What I learned at 57 is that dignity is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not demand validation. It simply stands firm and refuses to shrink. I learned that you can survive heartbreak without becoming hard. You can protect yourself without becoming cruel. You can let go without erasing the love that once existed. And most importantly, I learned that being alive is not about who claims you. It is about who you choose to be when no one else is watching. I'm still a father. That truth doesn't disappear just because a relationship changed. But I'm also a man, and for the first time in my life, those two truths exist without conflict. I no longer measure my worth by how much pain I can endure. I measure it by how honestly I live. And at 57, after everything I lost and everything I found again, that feels like the greatest victory of all. If someone tells you that you are dead to them, believe them the first time. Do not argue with it. Do not translate it into something softer so it hurts less. Do not assume they are speaking from pain and will take it back once they calm down. Words like that are not accidents, they are decisions. And the mistake most of us make is thinking love means staying after those words are spoken. It does not. Love means knowing when to leave with your dignity intact. For a long time, I thought walking away was weakness. I thought it meant I had failed as a father, as a man, as a human being. I believed that if I just waited long enough, stayed quiet long enough, proved my patience long enough, things would return to how they were. That belief nearly erased me. What I understand now is that staying where you are not wanted slowly teaches you to hate yourself. It turns hope into humiliation. It turns love into self-betrayal. Do not haunt a place that buried you. That lesson cost me years of peace. When someone makes it clear that your presence brings them discomfort instead of comfort, respect that truth even if it breaks your heart. Especially if it breaks your heart. Because chasing people who have decided to erase you does not make you loyal. It makes you invisible. And invisibility is a dangerous place to live. You start shrinking. You start apologizing for existing. You start confusing endurance with virtue. I learned that boundaries are not punishments. They are truths put into action. When I made my separation official, when I stopped showing up uninvited, stopped offering help that was not asked for, stopped funding a life that had no room for me, I was not being cruel. I was being honest. Honest with myself about what I could survive and what I could not. Honest about the fact that love without mutual respect will hollow you out no matter how pure your intentions are. Love should never require you to disappear to be accepted. That sentence took me decades to understand. Real love allows you to exist fully, flaws and all. It does not ask you to be smaller, quieter, less human. It does not demand silence in exchange for belonging. The moment love becomes conditional on your absence, it is no longer love. It is control wearing a familiar face. I am still alive, more alive than I have been in years. Alive in ways I forgot were possible. I laugh without checking my phone. I make plans without fear of rejection. I sleep without replaying old conversations in my head. I wake up knowing that my worth is not tied to anyone else's approval. That kind of aliveness does not come from winning arguments or proving people wrong. It comes from choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else. Making it official was the kindest thing I ever did for myself, not because it closed a door, but because it opened my life. It taught me that self-respect is not selfish. It is necessary. It taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept the ending and refuse to live in the ruins. And it taught me that peace is not found by holding on tighter. It is found by letting go with clarity, courage, and grace. That is the moral I live by now. If someone tells you that you are dead to them, do not try to come back as a ghost. Walk away as a living man. Carry your story with you, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. You survived being erased. And that means you deserve a life where you are fully seen, fully respected, and fully alive.